Two officers flee the dark, knock on an ex-Navy SEAL's door. His dog's next move shocks everyone. The knock came wrong. That was the first thing Daniel Cross registered as consciousness snapped into place. Not loud, not weak, wrong. It was uneven. 3 fast raps, a pause too long, then 2 more, as if the person knocking couldn't decide whether to beg or flee. 7 hours. Cross didn't move. He lay still in the darkness, breathing slow, heart already awake. Years of night operations had trained his body to wake before his mind asked permission. Beside the bed, a shape shifted, not suddenly, not nervously. Alert. Ranger lifted his head without a sound. That alone set Cross's pulse ticking faster. The Belgian Malinois never lifted his head unless there was a reason. No nightmares, no false alarms, no wasted motion. Ranger had learned silence the same way Cross had, by surviving places where noise meant death. The dog's ears angled forward, then forward again, then flattened. A low sound vibrated in his chest. Not a growl, a warning only Cross would recognize. Someone was on the porch, and they were afraid. Cross slid his feet onto the floor, letting the cold wood ground him. He didn't reach for the pistol in the biometric safe. Not yet. He didn't need a weapon to answer a door. He needed information. Ranger rose and padded toward the hallway, nails silent, body low but controlled. He stopped 6 feet from the front door and sat, rigid, disciplined, eyes locked on the wood as if he could see through it. Cross frowned. Ranger didn't sit like that unless he sensed something unstable, something unpredictable. The knock came again, harder this time. "Sir," a voice called, barely steady. "Please, we need help." "Sir." Cross exhaled through his nose. He hadn't been called that in years. The house at the edge of nowhere. The house wasn't supposed to exist. Officially, it was just outside the boundaries of Raven Rock Auxiliary Annex, a secure government installation buried beneath layers of concrete, rock, and classification. Unofficially, it was close enough that the hum of backup generators became white noise at night. Cross liked it that way. The isolation, the quiet, the feeling of being close enough to watch, but far enough to be forgotten. After retiring from the Navy, he had turned down offers, training gigs, consulting contracts, a quiet phone call from a 3-letter agency that didn't like to leave voicemails. He said no to all of it. He didn't want to fix broken systems anymore. He just wanted peace. But peace, he had learned, was a temporary condition. Cross moved to the door, standing just off to the side, not silhouetted. He flipped on the porch light. 2 figures stood there, shoulders hunched, breath fogging the air. Both in uniform. Both young. One wore the silver bars of a lieutenant, the other, the twin rails of a captain. Their faces told the story before their mouths ever could. Fear, exhaustion, and something heavier beneath it. Guilt. Cross opened the door 6 inches. Ranger stepped forward immediately. Not aggressively, purposefully. The dog moved past Cross's knee and onto the porch, placing himself squarely between the 2 officers in the doorway. Then, without warning, he turned his head sharply. He blocked the captain with his body and stared directly at the lieutenant, teeth bared. Low growl. The lieutenant froze. The captain's eyes widened. "Sir, your dog." "Don't move," Cross said quietly. The lieutenant swallowed hard. I didn't do anything." Ranger took 1 slow step closer. The growl deepened. Cross felt a familiar chill slide down his spine. Ranger had only reacted like this once before. Afghanistan, 2013, Kandahar province. A man with clean hands and a dirty soul. 10 minutes later, the bomb went off. Cross reached down and placed 2 fingers against Ranger's collar. Easy. The dog did not retreat. But he held. "Inside," Cross said. "Now." The captain didn't hesitate. He grabbed the lieutenant's sleeve and pulled him forward. Ranger stepped aside just enough to let the captain pass, then snapped his jaws inches from the lieutenant's thigh. A warning, not an attack. Yet, the lieutenant stumbled inside, shaking. Cross shut the door, locked it, then locked it again. The lie in the room, the living room lights stayed off. Only the kitchen spill light illuminated the space in soft amber, catching dust motes in the air. Framed photos lined the far wall, none of them recent. Men in desert gear, a younger Cross, Ranger in a harness, eyes sharp, tongue lolling after a long patrol. The lieutenant stared at the photos like they were judging him. Ranger sat directly in front of him, blocking his path to the door, blocking his path to Cross. The captain spoke first. "Chief Cross." "Retired," Cross corrected. The captain nodded. "Sir, we didn't know where else to go." Cross crossed his arms. "That's never why people knock on my door at 2 in the morning." Silence. The lieutenant wiped sweat from his brow. "They're coming." Cross tilted his head slightly. "Who's they?" The captain took a breath that trembled. "People who don't wear name tapes. That was enough." Cross turned his gaze to the lieutenant. "You." The lieutenant flinched as if struck. "Sir? Why does my dog think you're dangerous?" The lieutenant laughed nervously. I don't know. Dogs don't like me." Ranger stood. This time, no growl, just a stare. Cross felt his stomach tighten. "Start talking," he said. The captain nodded. "There's an operation on base, off the books. Started as a counterintelligence audit." Cross already knew where this was going. "It changed," the captain continued. "People started disappearing, reports altered, detentions without charges." The lieutenant whispered, "They said it was for national security." Ranger barked once, sharp, final. The lieutenant jumped. "I didn't know what they'd do." "But you signed," Cross said calmly. The lieutenant broke. "I signed," he shouted. "I signed the reports. I didn't ask questions. I told myself it wasn't my place." Outside, faintly, engines idled. Ranger turned his head toward the sound. Cross closed his eyes. The war had followed him home. Cross moved to the window and parted the blinds a fraction. Headlights rolled slowly down the service road. Black SUVs, no markings. The kind of vehicles that didn't need to identify themselves. Professionals, contractors. They moved like men who expected compliance. Cross felt something old and unwelcome stir in his chest. Duty. He opened a hall closet and pulled out a Pelican case, dust thick on the seal. He set it on the table and cracked it open. Inside lay a world he'd tried to leave behind, encrypted comms, old credentials, a worn seal Trident coin. The captain stared. "Sir, are you going to help us?" Cross looked at him. Really looked. Young, tired, but standing straight. "Yes," Cross said. "But not for the reason you think." The lieutenant trembled. "They'll kill us." Cross nodded. "They'll try." Ranger moved to Cross's side. "Ready. Always ready." Cross snapped the case shut. "Congratulations," he said quietly. "You've just reminded me why I never liked retirement." Outside, boots crunched on gravel. A voice called out, "Chief Petty Officer Cross, this is Colonel Hayes." Cross closed his eyes. Of course it was. Some ghosts never stayed buried. The voice outside the door carried easily through the wood. Calm, measured, certain. "Chief Petty Officer Daniel Cross," it said again. "You know who this is?" Cross didn't answer. He stood in the shadowed living room, Ranger at heel, listening, not just to the voice, but to everything behind it. Boots shifting weight, the faint metallic click of a rifle sling being adjusted, the discipline of men who knew exactly how much force they were authorized to use. Not soldiers, not tonight. Colonel Andrew Hayes had always preferred plausible deniability over uniforms. Cross stepped closer to the door, staying out of the porch light. "Andrew," he called back, using the first name deliberately. "It's late for social calls." A pause, then a small, humorless chuckle. "You always did hate formalities." Behind Cross, the captain swallowed. The lieutenant's breathing was shallow now, rapid, like an animal caught in a snare. Ranger's ears flattened again. "Call your men back," Cross said. "You don't have jurisdiction here, not officially," Hayes replied. "But you and I both know how thin those lines really are." Cross leaned his forehead briefly against the door. He hadn't heard Hayes's voice in 7 years, not since the hearing. The man who signed the orders, Andrew Hayes, had once been everything the system wanted: West Point combat arms, decorated service in 2 wars, promotions that came early and often. He was sharp, articulate, and utterly convinced that the mission justified the method. Cross had respected him once. That respect died the day Hayes signed off on an operation that left 3 civilians dead and labeled the aftermath classified error. Cross had testified. Hayes had survived. Careers had diverged sharply after that. Now, Hayes stood on Cross's porch in the middle of the night with a private force at his back. That told Cross everything he needed to know. "Andrew," Cross said evenly, If you've got contractors on my road, then you've already crossed a line. You crossed it first, Hayes replied. You're harboring two officers who violated standing orders. Cross glanced back. The captain stood rigid, jaw clenched, eyes fixed straight ahead. The lieutenant stared at the floor. Only one of them violated anything, Cross said, silence. Then, softly, Hayes asked, "Your dog still doesn't like him?" Cross didn't answer. Ranger growled. Low, controlled. Hayes exhaled. "Damn it." Inside, the captain finally spoke. "Sir," he said quietly. "My CO tried to report the disappearances. 2 days later, his access was revoked. A day after that, he was gone." Cross turned to face him. Name, Lieutenant Colonel Rebecca Hale. Cross's jaw tightened. He remembered Hale. Smart. Direct. Unafraid to ask why. That kind never lasted long in the wrong environment. "And you?" Cross asked. "Why didn't you disappear?" The captain hesitated. "Because I didn't sign." Ranger's head tilted slightly. Cross felt something ease, just a fraction. "And you?" Cross said, turning to the lieutenant. "Why did you?" The lieutenant's voice broke. "Because they told me I was protecting the country." Ranger stood. This time, Cross didn't correct him. "You weren't protecting the country," Cross said quietly. "You were protecting yourself." Outside, Hayes's voice hardened. "Daniel, this doesn't have to end badly." Cross laughed softly. "It already has." He reached into the Pelican case and pulled out the secure handset. The captain's eyes widened. "Sir, that frequency is still active," Cross finished. "They never retire the ghosts. They just pretend they don't exist." He keyed the device, Raven Rock Watch. He said calmly, "This is Cross. I am invoking Title 10 whistleblower protections and requesting immediate oversight presence." Static. Then, a pause. Then a voice far older than Hayes's replied, "Say again, Cross." Hayes stiffened outside. Cross smiled grimly. "2 officers," Cross said into the handset. "1 lawful refuser, 1 admitting falsification under coercion, private contractors operating without clear authority." The voice on the other end was very still. "Stand by." Hayes stepped closer to the door. "Daniel, think carefully." Cross leaned down and rested a hand on Ranger's neck. "I am." Behind him, the lieutenant sank to his knees. "I'll tell them everything," he sobbed. "Just don't let them take me." Ranger barked once, not in anger, in warning. Cross looked down at the young man. "This isn't about what happens to you," he said. "It's about what you're willing to face." Outside, engines revved, but none advanced. Hayes knew what that meant. Oversight was waking up, and oversight hated surprises. Night holds. Its breath for a long moment, no one moved. Fog rolled across the road, swallowing boots, tires, the edges of men who had expected obedience and found resistance instead. Hayes spoke quietly now. "You always were a pain in the ass, Cross." Cross smiled without humor. "And you always bet on fear." Ranger shifted, placing himself squarely between the lieutenant and the door, a line drawn. At last, Hayes stepped back. "This isn't over," he said. "No," Cross agreed. "It never is." Red and blue lights flickered in the distance, real ones, uniformed ones. The contractors melted into the darkness. Hayes walked away without another word. Cross closed the door slowly. The house was quiet again, but it was no longer the same quiet. The captain exhaled, long and shaky. "Sir, what happens now?" Cross looked at Ranger. The dog met his eyes, steady, unflinching. "Now," Cross said, "we see who's brave when the sun comes up." Dawn didn't arrive all at once. It crept. The fog thinned in pale layers, peeling back the road, the fence line, the quiet geometry of a place designed to hide in plain sight. Raven Rock Auxiliary Annex emerged from the night like a fortress pretending to be nothing at all. Inside Cross's house, no one had slept. The lieutenant sat on the floor where he had collapsed, back against the wall, eyes red and hollow. The captain stood at the window, posture locked into something that looked like parade rest, but felt more like defiance. Cross brewed coffee, old habit, old comfort. Ranger lay at his feet, eyes open, tracking every breath in the room. He had not left the lieutenant alone for a single second. When the kettle clicked off, Cross poured 3 cups. He set one in front of the captain, one near the lieutenant. The lieutenant didn't touch it. "Drink," Cross said. "You're going to need your hands steady." The lieutenant nodded weakly and lifted the cup with shaking fingers. Outside, official vehicles rolled in. White, gray, clearly marked. MPs, investigators, people who wore name tapes and followed regulations, the system correcting itself, or pretending to. They brought the captain in first. A conference room buried 2 levels below ground, no windows, walls the color of institutional beige. A single flag stood in the corner, its fabric stiff and immaculate. 3 people waited at the table, a major general, a civilian oversight attorney, and a woman in a dark suit with eyes sharp enough to cut glass. The captain snapped to attention. "At ease," the general said. The captain didn't relax. "Captain Elias Monroe," the civilian said, reading from a folder. "You refuse to sign an operational report citing national security." "Yes, ma'am. On what grounds?" "Illegality, silence." The woman in the dark suit studied him. "That's a heavy word." Monroe met her gaze. "So is disappearance." The general's jaw tightened. "Tell us about Colonel Hayes." Monroe took a breath and spoke. For 47 minutes, he laid out everything. Names, dates, orders that came verbally instead of in writing, access logs that vanished, security footage rerouted. When he finished, the room was very quiet. The woman closed her folder. "You understand what this costs you?" "Yes, ma'am. Promotion, command track, possibly your career." Monroe nodded. "Yes, ma'am." The general leaned back slowly. "Why do it then?" Monroe hesitated. Then he said the truth. "Because I still want to recognize myself in the mirror." The lieutenant's reckoning. They brought the lieutenant in next. He looked smaller now, not because of fear, but because the lies had fallen away. Ranger wasn't allowed in the building. That bothered Cross more than it should have. The lieutenant sat across from the same table, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. "You admitted to falsifying reports," the civilian said. "Under oath." "Yes, why?" The lieutenant swallowed. "Because they told me I was being tested. That loyalty meant obedience. And now? Now I know loyalty without conscience is just cowardice in uniform." The woman leaned forward. "Who gave the order?" The lieutenant closed his eyes. "Colonel Hayes." The general exhaled slowly. "And who enforced it?" The lieutenant's voice shook. "Contractors, not soldiers." Silence again. The general stood. "Lieutenant, you are relieved of duty pending court-martial." The lieutenant nodded. He had expected that. "What happens to me?" he asked quietly. The woman met his eyes. "That depends on how much truth you're willing to give us." The lieutenant straightened. "All of it." The man who wouldn't be quiet, Cross, waited in the hallway. No rank on his chest. No authority in the building. And yet, everyone who passed him slowed, just a fraction. They knew his name. They knew his history. They knew what it meant when someone like Daniel Cross showed up uninvited. A young sergeant approached hesitantly. "Chief, sir, Mr. Cross?" Cross smiled faintly. "Pick one. They're asking for you." Cross nodded. Inside the room, the tone shifted. Respect entered with him. "Daniel," the general said. "It's been a long time, not long enough," Cross replied. The woman in the dark suit studied him. "You activated a frequency no one is supposed to know exists," Cross shrugged. "You never erased it. We should have." "Then you wouldn't be here," Cross said calmly. The general sighed. "What do you want?" Cross didn't hesitate. "Transparency." A pause. "That's a dangerous word," the civilian said. "So is silence," Cross replied. The woman leaned back. "Colonel Hayes denies everything." Cross nodded. "Of course he does. He says you're acting out of personal grievance." Cross smiled sadly. "That's how truth usually sounds to people invested in lies." The general rubbed his temples. "If we pursue this, it will get ugly." Cross leaned forward. "It already is. You just haven't looked in the right corners." Pressure. Without bruises, by noon, the base buzzed, phones rang, emails were recalled, access badges stopped working, careers began to bleed quietly. Colonel Hayes was placed on administrative leave, official language, unofficial fallout. The captain was reassigned to a desk with no future. The lieutenant was escorted to holding. Cross returned home. Ranger greeted him like he'd been gone a year. That night, Cross sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the fence. Ranger lay beside him, chin on paws. "You did good," Cross murmured. Ranger thumped his tail once, simple approval. Across the road, a black SUV idled. Not moving, not approaching, just watching. Cross didn't reach for his weapon. He reached for Ranger's collar. Whatever was coming next wouldn't be decided by force. It would be decided by who blinked first. The second disappearance happened at 0316. No alarms, no struggle. Just a desk cleared overnight and a name quietly removed from the duty roster like it had never existed. Captain Elias Monroe was late for morning formation. That alone was enough to make people uneasy. Monroe had been reassigned to administrative review pending ongoing clarification, a phrase so soft it could smother a career without leaving fingerprints. When his platoon sergeant went to his quarters, the bed was made. Too neatly. The laptop was gone. The uniforms were gone. The family photo on the desk was gone. Only one thing remained, a folded index card taped to the inside of the closet door. "Don't push this further." The sergeant didn't report it. He took the card straight to the woman in the dark suit. She read it once, then burned it. The pressure campaign by mid-morning, the base command issued a statement. There has been no unauthorized detention of any personnel. Captain Monroe is on temporary assignment. Rumors to the contrary will be treated as violations of good order and discipline. Cross read it on his phone while standing at the kitchen sink. Ranger sat beside him. The water ran too long. "They're testing us," Cross said quietly. Ranger's ears twitched. The black SUV was back across the road. Different driver. Same intent. That afternoon, Cross received a call from an unknown number. He answered it anyway. "Daniel," Hayes said. Cross's jaw tightened. "You've got nerve. I've got leverage," Hayes replied. "And you've got a choice." Cross didn't respond. "You like the captain," Hayes continued. "He's brave, principled, exactly the kind of man the system eats first." "What did you do to him?" Cross asked. A pause. "Nothing permanent," Hayes said. "Yet," Cross's voice dropped. "You hurt him, Andrew, and this stops being political." Another pause. Longer this time. "You don't have the authority to make that threat," Hayes said. Cross smiled coldly. "I never said I did." Monroe woke in a room with no windows. The light never changed. The questions came in cycles, not shouted, not violent, just persistent. "Who told you to talk? What proof do you have? How much does Cross know?" Monroe answered the same way every time. The truth. They let him sit alone for hours. Then days blurred, until finally, a new voice entered the room. Calm. "Female. You're costing people their jobs," she said. Monroe looked up. It was the woman in the dark suit. "Good," Monroe replied hoarsely. "They shouldn't have them." She studied him for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Hold on," she said quietly. "Help is coming." Cross makes his move. Cross didn't wait. He never had. He drove straight to the annex gate, Ranger in the back seat, old credentials clipped to his belt. The guard recognized him instantly. "Sir, open it," Cross said. The guard hesitated. Then the gate rose. Inside, Cross walked into the heart of a machine that didn't want him there. He bypassed offices, ignored stairs, until he reached the secure operations wing. Two contractors blocked the corridor. Ranger stepped forward. They stepped back. "Gentlemen," Cross said calmly, "you're out of your depth." One of them sneered. "This is restricted." Cross held up his old trident coin. "I helped build what you're hiding in," he said. "Move." They did. Inside, Cross found Monroe. Bruised, tired, still standing. Monroe stared. "Sir, you shouldn't be here." Cross crouched beside him. "I go where my people go." Ranger pressed his head into Monroe's chest. The captain laughed weakly. That sound, caught on a security mic, would end careers. Colonel Hayes arrived 10 minutes later. His composure cracked when he saw Cross. "This is insubordination," Hayes snapped. "No," Cross replied. "This is accountability." Oversight poured in behind him. The woman in the dark suit met Hayes's eyes. "You're done," she said simply. Hayes looked around. No allies, no exits. He sagged. Fallout. By nightfall, arrests were made, contractors detained, files opened, Monroe was released. The lieutenant entered formal proceedings, this time, truthfully. Cross returned home at dusk. Ranger trotted beside him. The SUV across the road was gone. This time, for good. The hearings took 3 weeks. They were not televised, they were not dramatic, they were not kind. Truth rarely is. The reckoning, Colonel Andrew Hayes sat alone at the long table, his uniform immaculate, his face hollowed by sleepless nights and certainty finally cracking under its own weight. The charges were read slowly. Abuse of authority, unlawful detention, falsification of operational records, use of private contractors to bypass military law. Each word landed heavier than the last. When asked how he pleaded, Hayes looked up, not at the panel, but at Daniel Cross, seated quietly in the back of the room. For a brief moment, something like regret passed through his eyes. Not guilty, Hayes said. The verdict came anyway. Careers ended, pensions vanished, names were stripped from buildings. Hayes was escorted out in silence. No speeches, no salutes, just footsteps fading down a corridor that no longer belonged to him. The ones who stayed standing. Captain Elias Monroe stood before a smaller board. Different room, different tone. The general spoke first. You cost us time, resources, political capital. Monroe didn't flinch. Yes, sir, and you saved lives, the general continued. Possibly the institution itself. Silence. You will not advance as quickly as your peers, the general said. You will never be invited to the quiet rooms where shortcuts are discussed. Monroe nodded. Understood. The general stood. But you will sleep at night. Monroe exhaled, for the first time in weeks. Outside, Cross waited. Ranger sat at his feet, tail thumping once when Monroe emerged. Monroe crouched and rested his forehead briefly against the dog's. He never stopped watching me, Monroe said softly. Cross nodded. He doesn't forget. The lieutenant was sentenced. Reduced in rank. Confined. But not erased. In his final statement, he didn't ask for mercy. He asked for accountability. I thought obedience made me loyal, he said. I was wrong. Silence was my crime. Ranger wasn't there to hear it, but Cross was. And that mattered. Weeks later, the road outside Cross's house was empty. No SUVs, no contractors, no shadows pretending to be official business. Cross sat on the porch as autumn crept in. Ranger lay beside him, older now, slower, but content. Monroe visited sometimes, never in uniform, always respectful. They talked about ordinary things, fishing, weather, dogs. The system moved on, it always did, but something had changed. A file stayed open, a policy tightened. A young officer somewhere paused before signing something that felt wrong. That was enough. The last scene one evening, as the sun dipped behind the fence, Monroe asked the question that had been sitting between them for weeks. Why did you answer the door? Cross didn't respond right away. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching as if he already knew the answer. Because, Cross said finally, sometimes the test doesn't come on a battlefield. He rested his hand on Ranger's neck. Sometimes it comes when you're tired. Retired. Convinced you've done your part, Ranger's tail thumped once, and sometimes, Cross continued, the ones who know right from wrong aren't wearing rank anymore. Monroe nodded. The light faded. The porch went quiet. Ranger yawned and settled closer to Cross, still vigilant, always faithful. Courage isn't loud. It doesn't always wear medals or stand at attention. Sometimes it growls softly at the truth and refuses to let it be ignored. When systems fail, it is character that holds the line. When fear demands silence, it is conscience that speaks. And when darkness knocks, it matters who answers the door and who stands beside them, knowing the truth before words ever do.